3, 2, 1.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Someli. I'm your host, Steven, and I have my second guest, Onagi.
Yeah, hi guys, I'm Onagi. I'm basically doing this VTuber thing. I don't know if you guys know about it, but yeah, basically I just started a YouTube channel and...
It's called Teabreak Afternoon.
Yeah, so there's only one video so far, but if you're interested in it, come watch it. You can hear me and my friend talking about some things that won't even be worth your time. Oh, and for the, because my videos in Japanese. どうも、おなぎです。今回はあれですね、ソメリさんとちょっとポッドキャストで話するっていう感じなんですけど、まあ、英語だからね、どのぐらいわかるか知らないけど、まあ、もし何言ってるか分かってる人がいるんだったら、まあ、せっかくなんでここでダメってる感じをちょっと楽しんでくださいな。Okay, yeah, I'm done.
Cool. So how about we start with that? What is a VTuber? Because I don't think most people on this side of the globe know what that is yet.
Well, VTuber is basically, well, YouTuber, obviously people know about YouTuber because, we're also part of it. People haven't seen so many of them.
Yep.
But it's not the case that, all YouTubers have good appearance or anything like that. Like, some of them might wear masks, for example, when they do their videos, or some of them might just, not show their face, but, people in Japan, or, I think actually, the original one came from America.
Really?
Yeah. But someone said, let's have a 3D model that basically traces the motion of the person who's making a video, so that it looks as if that 3D model, that whatever that animation of that, 3D model is, just a person, yeah. And it was it was some kind of minor genre at the beginning in YouTube, but it's just that when Japanese people found it, they were saying, that is my dream.
I can imagine. Didn't the virtual diva thing happen first because of you guys?
Yeah, basically. Virtual diva, yeah, like the Hatsune Miku and all those things, which originally did not have any animation, but just a voice.
Huh.
But later on, there's a voice, so why not put a person? Kind of thing happened. Now, that's a little separate, but still in the similar direction of making something virtual and kind of just unreal into semi-real. And that's the reason why the virtual diva now has a live concert, which is honestly pretty fun.
Huh.
And more real than it did. Yeah, once.
Huh.
It was actually, they use what do you call those was it holographs or something like that?
Hologram, I think.
Yeah, they have smoke, some very faint smoke in the stage, in the dome, and they project light to the smoke,
yeah.
And it makes it look real. So that was actually interesting. But okay, let's go. We're kind of going off track, so I'm gonna bring it back to the VTuber. But so VTuber now is basically 3D models or 2D illustrations moving as the person in front of the camera moves. It's been a new thing. It's been something that's gained popularity in the past 2 years or something. I'm not the expert, but it's somewhere around that. And now there are even companies that are basically having basically show people, showman, showwoman, that has distinct illustrations and distinct names. They have their own channel. They do collaborations with other people in the same company and those kind of stuff. And it is something that does create a lot of sensation because it's something it's still fresh, and also the people there at the end it's about who's inside that whatever 2D illustration, 3D animation.
There's still people in there, right?
Yeah. So as long as they're interesting, they have their character, their own character, and the flashiness of the design and the technology that combines into some content that gains, all those popularity and whatever like that.
So what type of content do you typically see?
Well, okay, so now the thing I need to clarify is that I am not necessarily the biggest fan of VTuber. It's more of my friend that suggested me, or told me about this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But as much as I saw, the most common content is playing games.
It's getting so big nowadays, actually.
Yeah, it's getting big. But I think it's also because it's a really good kind of intro for the YouTuber or even a VTuber to just get the hang of making videos and everything like that. So they usually start off with games. And then later on, they start to go to more just like, talking on their own for about a half an hour, like without any game screen or anything like that. Or it could be some kind of like, like a simple like show or like some skit that they might do. But it really depends on what that person is able to do at that point. They sometimes, because the illustration and the person inside it are not necessarily like how to say
a good match.
Not to say good match, but like because the two aren't necessarily from the same like concept. Usually you have an illustration and a character design or like setting that's made, and people like do auditions to fit into that.
Oh, huh.
Which makes the person inside and the character that they're supposed to act sometimes different.
It's a little disjointed, not exactly one-to-one. Whereas you and your friend are making your own characters, and that comes directly from you and shows off what you are.
Yeah, well, I mean, in our case, we kind of, don't have an excuse, but we didn't have a setting from the start too much. But one example could be, this girl is a high school girl that's, and like basically organizing like the student like community or something like that, or whatever like that, has good grades, is very like polite and elegant. That's the kind of character that they might have. But later on, because the person inside also starts to like show the kind of person they are, and that person ended up starting to recite this thread online, which is basically about one of those like otakus screaming about their waifu. It starts with the guy basically sniffing on one of those goods that the waifu. Later on in the middle, or like somewhere a little before the middle, says, but she's not real. My wife is not real. Then goes to rejecting reality and say, no, I don't care about reality if I could get my waifu, and then screams in madness. And the VTuber recited that. Now that's not too elegant and polite, is it?
No.
But ends up making it interesting, because there's a kind of like variation that happens in the video because of that. That there's sometimes the person inside is actually like the character saying, acting based on the character saying. Sometimes the right opposite. The kind of gap between the visual and the audio makes it weird. And also, just because you don't know what kind of way it's going to be in each video, people actually get excited about it. So it's a really interesting field in that sense.
So, okay, so what kind of content are you going to try to make?
Well, yeah, as I said, gaming videos are the basic of YouTuber activities and everything like that, so I'm planning to do that for now. But eventually, I do want to start going into, I do something based on my interests, such as talk about Japanese culture and specifically things, this Japanese theater or drama or whatever category called rakugo, and basically rakugo is a branch of Japanese theater and everything like that, or performance. I want to do videos about that, and aside from that, maybe go to some stuff that I know online, such as talking about some article I saw in the SCP Foundation website or something like that. But to push more of what I like so that I could share it, and people could also have a place to share their own.
And to have a conversation with people about it, right?
Yeah, basically.
I like what we're doing here.
Yeah, basically what we're doing here, just that, how to say, I mean, I want more of them, their input in it. Like, I want them to, make my video a place to talk, instead of me talking over them and then them giving me a response. So, kind of like that. Like, that's what I want. My friend might do a little bit more about, playing instruments or talking about art.
He's a musician?
He's a musician and an artist. So, eventually, if we see that there are people who are interested in our stuff, that's how we're trying to go.
Cool. So how about we go into the different types of Japanese theater? Seem to know a lot about that. So you got rakugo.
Yes, rakugo.
What else is there?
Okay, so rakugo, first of all, is a one-man performance, a comedic kind of performance usually, where you have a person basically sitting in front of the audience, and that person, without really using tools or anything, act out the scene, act out different people, and act out in a way that it looks maybe stupid or witty or what, like, in just various ways to grab attention and to make the entire flow very, very entertaining when it's only just a person in front of you talking for the entire time without any break. Very interesting, and also very, how to say, familiar in a sense. Because the thing that Rakugo picks up usually are things that people feel every day. And to make that look interesting, or to make that look heartwarming, or sometimes terrifying, depending on the case. But it's from the perspective of normal people, which makes Rakugo kind of like this, like, art form or performance that's, to everyone.
And the one person's doing every single role, right? He's like impersonating an old woman or a young boy.
Yeah.
Or a god, stuff like that.
Basically, yeah. That person will do everything that's involved in that whole, like, task of performing. The only tool he has is a fan.
Why a fan?
Well, I'm not exactly sure why exactly, but it's just having a fan wasn't that, like, uncommon in general. Like, back in, like, the days in Edo or whatever, like, sometime around that. So I think it's just that, because having a fan in general was common, the person who was performing in front of the audience also had one, and used it to make it look like a stick, or a chopstick, or plate, or other things. Because if you open a fan, then it looks like a flat object. So
yeah, that's actually pretty smart. I didn't think about that.
So that's kind of Rakugo. And other than that, the ones that I know are, well, Kabuki, pretty famous, like the one that Japan is basically pushing as that one traditional, like, performance, like, genre.
Yeah, I've heard of Kabuki theater before.
Yeah. Kabuki is now, well, it's, how to say, it's something that used to be authentic and familiar, but because, people start to get interested in different stuff, now it's kind of more perceived as, like, this classic kind of theater. But imagine something like Shakespeare kind of theater, except that, they also have acrobats and, like, dramatic kind of, like, like,
do they have masks?
They don't have masks, but they have paintings that make it look like masks. Very distinct in that they usually have white kind of, like, painting on their face, and on top of that they have red or blue lines. The colors also show, the kind of character they are supposed to be. So it's there for the audience far away to recognize what character it is, and to make it look flashy at the same time. Honestly, it was pretty cool when I saw that, like, one scene where it's basically a fight scene at the end of the entire, like, performance. But you have a whole bunch of people, like, they don't even have names, but people who basically act out as soldiers or something like that, fighting with each other or fighting with the main character, throwing objects from far away and catching it on top of 3 more people or something like that. So that, in that sense, it's still pretty, like, it's not really too, like, close to like the super boring kind of, like, classic ones in a sense. It's still got that, interesting vibe in it, and they're trying to keep
action
that.
in it.
Yeah,
That's cool.
especially the thing is they've been touching One Piece and those kind of manga.
They've been doing, like, modern adaptations of Kabuki theater stuff. So
Oh yeah, it's the same Kabuki, like, theater, the same people that do the classic thing that's trying to be new, because that's what Kabuki is supposed to be. The whole name is supposed to mean something new and weird and flashy.
Really?
Basically, like, it's not a literal translation, but that's kind of what they want to be. So they went to do, like, I think they did, they definitely did One Piece. I don't know about Naruto, but they did also, like, other, like, Jump comic kind of things.
Dragon Ball?
Dragon Ball, I'm not exactly sure actually about that.
JoJo?
JoJo, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. Unfortunately, no Star Platinum, that says, Stop Urachinamu, or something like that. Not yet.
I think that would be pretty cool. See another Japanese man going, ora, 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 ora.
Yeah. It might, like, actually sound like, ora, 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 or something like that, but I don't know. Yes. Okay, sorry. It might have, like, sounded very awful. If you're a fan of Kabuki, I am sorry. But, so, yeah. So that's Rakugo. That's Kabuki. Now we're going to go to the older ones that became the basis of Kabuki, which are No, and Kyogen.
So the 3 different, No,
I mean, no and Kyogen. Sorry, I mean,
Oh, okay.
I kind of pronounce it as no, but no.
Yeah.
I mean, it's supposed to be N-O-H. But
Oh, okay.
no is basically, if I give a simple description of what it is, the one that has the highest expectation to the audience.
Why? What about it?
No is a good way to say it is very simplistic. There isn't too much stage props. The background music is also not flashy.
Mm-hmm.
The performance, the kind of dance that they do, is not as dramatic. But you're supposed to know the context of the story, the kind of technique that they're employing at that moment, and from that, basically find out the essential pathos of the whole performance. And to be honest, because it's kind of boring to people, and because it's super long, even after they shortened it to 4 hours for a single performance, it's still shorter than before. But
I think you told me once there's one that was 13 hours long.
yeah, usually, the thing is, when they really try to do it from start to end, it could go that long. In the past, even before Kabuki existed, that was the things that basically aristocrats and higher ranked people entertain, and also had the idea of Zen in the performance itself.
Oh, really? Like entering that one peaceful state during the whole time of the performance?
Yeah, because the performing requires extensive amount of focus and also stamina at the same time. Because well, first of all, it's
13 hours. Like 3 hours of baseball, that's pretty tough. So I can't imagine 13 hours of acting.
Yeah. And on top of that, the guy who basically founded the basis of no,
Mm-hmm.
his philosophy is very similar to Zen and very I think it has some influence from Zen, but later on also influenced the Buddhist ideas and everything like that as well. So he was a philosopher. So that philosophy and the extensive difficulty in understanding it and to perform it made the whole the acting kind of Zen, where you need to push yourself into a state of calmness without having any distraction and blah blah blah. So it really has a lot of high expectations for you to understand all of that. Now, that was no exception to the people at that time. People wanted something entertaining and simple, and that's the reason why there's this thing called Kyogen that popped out of that. No. Kyogen originally was a more of an interlude show in between No.
So like preliminary acts.
Preliminary or in between the two acts kind of thing. And the thing is, because No was at the end entertainment, they wanted to make sure that audiences understand what happens. So in the middle, for example, the 2 or 3 acts, they have the scene where a not necessarily dumb, but more kind of say easy to understand kind of guy come out and explain what's happening and what's gonna happen from now, and then that's done in a comical way because that makes it a little bit more interesting. And they took that out and made it into an entire show called Kyogen.
Kind of sounds like Rakugo a little bit.
Rakugo, in a sense, yes, or maybe in a sense, how the rappers came out of MCs that were in between
Yeah.
shows and the streets.
Yeah, I see.
It's kind of like that. People wanted to look at that because that itself was interesting. That became a genre, and that developed on its own, separate from the original one, and sometimes interacting with the original one. But Kyogen typically includes things such as the lower rank or the weaker overcoming the higher rank or the stronger, and in many ways, this might be, for example, there's a character called Taro Kaja, who's more of the lower rank servant, servant basically, and he kind of has some witty idea or some skill. Usually ends up failing because he's super dumb, but just the situation of that, of how that skill or idea or knowledge was used, ends up making the guys who are in higher rank somewhere to the same level as the lower rank servant. Maybe because the higher rank guy started to enjoy being dumb, or maybe that the Taro Kaja, the lower rank servant, and proving proving himself better in some aspect to the high rank guy or whatever like that. But the whole point is basically to have this how to say, the common kind of entertainment of seeing this rigid structure, at least temporarily, kind of nullifying and merging into each other.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Kyogen, and
so those were styles. It's Rakugo, Kabuki, No, and Kyogen.
yeah, those are the ones that I kind of know. I could even go to Kagura, which is a little bit more, which is specifically a ritual kind of performance. But
what type of rituals?
Usually Kaguras are Shinto, ritual dances that are performed in festivals for the purpose of entertaining the gods. Or the god in the shrine, depending on how many gods are being worshipped in the same shrine. But
yeah, we talked about that a long time ago about what old Japanese culture used to worship before Buddhism arrived on the mainland, right?
yeah, and also after that, Buddhism and Shintoism kind of merged into each other to have a Buddhist temple and a Shinto shrine in the same place, and people coming to both of them. So it is another kind of interesting thing right there, but many of the aspects about the Kagura is also found in No, because it's one of the origins of No. So I could explain a little bit, but it might be a little bit more of an explanation of Shintoism or something like that. So it's up to you,
Yeah, why not get into Shintoism?
Oh,
You talked about it once where, was it there were spirits all around?
Yeah.
Like the yokai kind of thing we were talking about? Or yokai evolved from that idea?
Yeah. Yokai is also part of the idea. In the whole concept of Shintoism, there is a misunderstanding that I noticed that unfortunately also exists in some Japanese people, because there are some people who are not interested in learning their own culture. But
well, we see that here too.
Okay, well.
Anyway, go on.
Okay. I'm not gonna say what I was about to say, but so the thing about Shintoism is that it's sometimes perceived as the religion of the emperor and the bloodline of the emperor, but it's not exactly that. There is an aspect of that, because the whole Shintoist religion is described in this text called Kojiki, which is basically the oldest found text in Japan, but it is described as the whole story of how the emperor is a lineage of the sun god, and how they, as the gods of heaven, not the gods of the land, have more authority. But even from that too, there's an earth god, or the Kunitsukami, that's what they call in Japanese, and the heaven god, the Amatsukami, which are symbols of many different aspects of life, such as just the world, life. It could be about time, it could be about harvest, it could be about fire, it could be about pain, it could be about sickness, or whatever like that. But
question, is the earth usually effeminate and the sky masculine?
now the thing is, because Kojiki describes the whole story as, Japan was, and the world was basically made because of the heaven gods. The ones that create the world, the earth, are both heaven gods.
Okay.
Izanagi and Izanami are the two gods that create the land. And there isn't too much of an explanation of where the gods of the land come from, but they're just there.
Okay. The reason I ask is because usually for other religions, for example, in the Greek mythos, Gaia is effeminate. She represents the earth and all that, and I think it's Oranos represents
the sky,
and all that. And then also for Mesopotamia, I forget their names. The first two gods were the god of order and the god of chaos. The god of chaos was female, and she was represented
was
by
it
the
Tiamat
ocean.
or something like that?
I don't know.
I think
remember.
I think it's Tiamat was the goddess that gave basically the kind of wife.
Yeah, and then the land was represented by the god of order. And when the god of order and the god of chaos met, they birthed the new gods that came out from them the Mesopotamians worshipped.
Hmm.
And the first thing those new gods did was kill their father and live on his corpse.
Yeah, which, the Tiamat got really angry, so she gave birth to monsters, saying, kill them.
Yeah, she sent the forces of chaos to go battle the gods. And the thing about that is, so what they would do, the gods would come together and choose someone to go fight off. What is the ideal god? Who should be the top god? And that person would go fight, and usually they would die. And eventually comes this god named Marduk, who's birthed, and he has eyes all around him. He can see everything around him. And he also could speak magic words that would make things happen. And he said that he would go challenge the forces of chaos and win. And if he did that successfully, he would become the ruler of all the gods. So the rest of the gods are like, okay, yeah, you can do it. Yeah, and all thinking that he was going to go and die. And he goes off, I think he descends in like a cage into the ocean to battle all those monsters. And he comes out successful. And the metaphorical idea behind it is like to be the ruler of the top is going to be someone who has that kind of idea of sight, vision, aware of all the things around you. Because if you're a leader, you need to be paying attention to all the people you have, notice whatever malintent might be there. And the other thing about him, that he can speak magic words, is good. It is good to be... I understand that as more being able to speak truth and be able to speak to people about things that are actually there in reality. It makes sense. It's clear to people. And it's kind of a good, interesting jump for people to make in that first big culture, that's like truth and awareness are ideals that the person in charge, the king, the emperor, should embody. And you see that develop further with Egyptian mythos as well.
Yeah, even Egyptian mythos has that, the sky. Wait, was the sky the woman or was the sky the man?
That one's a little different. As in, Isis is the god of chaos, and Osiris is the god of the underworld, and he represents something else that I don't remember. He's like the old father, and then Set is his brother, and Set eventually that name would evolve into Satan. He represents kind of like treachery, tyranny, all those kinds of things, all the malice that wants to disrupt the order that's already established. And over time, he kept trying to kill Osiris over the years, and he kept failing. And as Osiris got older, he became blind, willfully blind. He wasn't paying attention to the disorder around him. And because of this, Set was able to kill him, cut him to pieces, and spread him across all of Egypt. And it was said that where Osiris's pieces were buried, that's where each province was represented, because the old father, he represents like the old culture, the old lessons that you have from the past. But the thing about our culture is, culture itself can't really see. It doesn't really change itself. So if it gets too old, it won't necessarily solve all the problems of the day, and chaos will kind of rule over it and take it down, destabilize it. And that's what that part represents. And what happens is Isis, Chaos, what she does is she goes and reunites some of the pieces of order, enough of Osiris that she can give birth to a child. And this child is Horus. And he's interesting. He's represented by a man with a hawk with a hawk's head. And the biggest thing that's emphasized with him is his eyes. And it's very similar to Marduk. Because, hawks, they fly in the sky, they can see very well. They can see tiny little mouse.
And they got the big damn eyes.
Yeah, they can just flow and pierce and stuff like that. And he rises up to challenge Set. And it's a bloody battle, and he loses an eye in the conflict. And the interesting thing I like about that is it's similar to the Marduk story, but descending into chaos to bring out order. Except he comes out victorious, but he loses an eye. And he also doesn't kill Set. He can't kill Set. He's a god. Those forces are immortal and will always be there in every society. And so but Horus regains his eye. Instead of plugging it back into his own, he goes to the underworld and gives it to his father, so his father can see, and he takes his father back into the real world, or back into the world of the living, and so that they can rule over together. And what I like about that is, compared to the Marduk story, you as a leader who embodies both truth and vision. You can see the malice around you, be aware of it. You must also recognize the ideas of the past, the ideas of your father, the ideas of your culture. There's importance in those, and it needs to be recognized and brought back. With this new awareness, may be made to see so it can tackle the new problems of the day. And every generation has to be doing that. Recognize the good, what makes our society whole in the past, and bring with it awareness of malice into the future.
Interesting.
So the reason why I brought that effeminate, masculine thing was because it made me think of those old stories, and Greek mythos kind of does this kind of stuff out as well.
Yeah. I have a feeling, well, like, as much as I recall, like, again, but, you know, it's about the chaos and order, it's kind of similar. The heaven gods are supposed to be like the representation of order and all the like the basically the greater like you know things in the world. Go into the land that Izanagi like gave birth to, where chaotic like you know things exist. But now, aside from saying, is a group of people that basically have a festival around a strip dancer to get a god out of basically like you know make a god come out of the room when that god was like you know in that room for a whole time saying I don't want to get out anymore. To whether we consider that as what a lawful god or lawful gods will do. Aside from that, many of the aspect of the story is about how they conquered the earth gods that are supposed to be chaotic. Now, the reason why I'm kind of saying kind of is because, to be honest, many of the stories in the Japanese mythology are
Unorganized?
It's really unorganized to the level that people start to say, okay, maybe this is the same story being repeated a few more times, but in different ways to indicate different kind of stuff. Or maybe this person was like the kind of this random person that popped out of nowhere is based on this person that could have been back in history, or blah blah. There's so many organized things because the whole point of that text, Kojiki, is to basically be the first. Well, I'm not sure if it's the first ever like in the history textbook of the country, but at least the first one to be kept for the future as a record of why the guys in power at the time are basically in power. So that's why I don't know, like many of the stories are kind of like more like how a specific group of people invaded a region with which already had indigenous people in it, and they considered the indigenous ones as more of the chaotic kunitsukami, which coincides with the fact that the god that led someone like the heaven gods to the land was also kunitsukami. But in many ways it feels in a sense different. Like the Mesopotamian, the Egyptian, the Greek, yes, there was probably a history of conquering and merging different religions at the time. But at least, what I feel from that is that they're vague enough to make it seem more like just mythology only, or at least 99% mythology. But the one that I see in Kojiki, the supposed Shinto ones that is recorded, feels a little different because it actually feels kind of like more like people in the name of gods having their life, killing or prospering or whatever like that, and something like that. So now,
the interesting thing about the Greek, Mesopotamian, Egyptian thing though is paganistic cultures had all these different gods to represent things because there wasn't any one major god necessarily. They could transfer gods over rather easily in certain cases. Like I think Hermes has it's either Hermes or Apollo.
Oh, Apollo.
I think it's Apollo has representation in other cultures other than the Greeks and Romans as well.
I know that Hermes is represented as Thoth, the god of knowledge in Egyptian mythology, but Apollo could be. I mean, it's a sun god.
He wasn't originally. Helios was the first sun god.
Yeah. Okay.
Then I think it was attributed to Apollo after the Greek supremacy kind of died down and the Romans started to take over.
Okay.
I don't remember his Roman name though, and that's an interesting thing too, like how the Romans took the ideas from the Greeks, but more so adapted them with new names to apply more directly to their way of life.
I mean, I think that's kind of the way even Greek mythology kind of went. Some of the stories do talk about some indigenous religions or deities from indigenous religions, and they either, like the case of Medusa, change it into a monster, or I honestly forgot what was the name, but sometimes, like in some cases, Zeus.
They're supposed to kill things.
No, Zeus fucks.
Oh, that one too, yeah.
Yeah, and some of the deities that Zeus gets involved are also deities from other indigenous religions that the Greeks conquered.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I heard that the backstory is that it was better for them to merge it in a pleasant way than to just demonize it, because in that way they could smoothly take that land in control as well. So Romans could have done the same thing, and I guess that's the reason why you have the switch of deities in the same role kind of thing happening over and over. But
I want to see how you think about this applying to Japanese mythos. Because one thing about the Greeks and Mesopotamians, I think a little bit less than Egyptians, but humans were more so seen as kind of a plaything of the gods. The things that humans were doing were to kind of placate them. They had no control over it. There's no objective moral rules or structure to the universe. It's more so everything was ruled by the whims of the gods. For example, the flood story of the Mesopotamians is that the gods thought the humans were too loud.
yeah,
So they sent the rains, and they couldn't stop it, and they got scared of the flood too. And another for the Greeks, the whole Trojan War mythos is just a god squabbling over which humans they had favor over.
well, I think it was specifically which of the three goddesses was the most hot looking or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was something like that.
Yeah, and then honestly, a lot of this stuff that gods do in the Greek mythology is just really about playing around with humans and kind of messing their life.
So, how does that idea apply to Japanese culture? What are the role of humans in older Shinto beliefs?
Okay, let me clarify one thing. Shintoism is separated into the kind of Shintoism told in Kojiki, and the kind of Shintoism that existed even before that. So I will talk about the one that's based on Kojiki, because the one that's not told, people don't even know where that came from sometimes. But according to that, there isn't really too much of a distinction between a human and a god at one point, because the characters that exist in that world, that for example could be like villager A in a game, is also a deity in some way, or it could be the indigenous Kunitsukami, that's also a deity in another way. There is a time when basically the existence of humans and gods are kind of in between, and it's really just about each of those people or gods fighting each other sometimes. And well,
are they gods of equal status, or is
now that's where Kojiki says no, the heavenly gods are above the earth gods or something like that. But now in terms of playing with humans,
another examples of yokai playing with humans?
Yes.
Play tricks on them.
If you go with yokai, yes, there's definitely a bunch. And if the essence of it is similar in saying that, well, the whole idea of yaoyorozu no kami, which is literally translated into 800 million gods, or 80 million gods, something like that, saying that there's a god for everything, like for your clothes, for your things, for the streets, for the towns, for the rocks, or whatever. Yokai has the same essence, and if you include yokai as part of that, then yes, we have the chaotic forces and the gods that play around the humans. In the case of yokai, the thing is that it's not as great as, like flooding an entire civilization or whatever like that. Like the worst that they could do is, for example, suddenly this yokai in the shape of long cloth wraps around your neck and chokes you out of nowhere. However, if there is one story that might be similar to that, is a story about Izanagi and Izanami basically breaking up, in a sense. Well, breaking up might not be the best way, but the whole story is Izanagi and Izanami gave birth to the islands of Japan and also some kids. However, Kaguzuchi, the god of fire, killed Izanami because, you know, if someone's trying to give birth to fire, then the fire's probably going to burn down that, you know, person before anything. So Izanami dies, but Izanagi misses Izanami. So he goes to the underworld and finds Izanami, who became ugly and who became rotten, and he freaks out, runs away. Izanami gets pissed. She chases Izanagi, and Izanagi basically closes the hole of that connects the underworld and the world outside with a gigantic rock. And the kind of conversation they have is Izanami basically curses Izanagi, saying, from now on, every day I will kill 1,000 people. Responds to that from Izanami is that, well, I will give birth to 2,000 every day. But that's like, at least as much as I remember, that's like the only example where basically gods having their own life suddenly affect humans out of nowhere. Because honestly, if I was a human, if I was there, I'm like, what?
So, what are they supposed to represent, Izanami and Izanagi? Because I'm seeing one is like the mother gives life and all that.
Izanami and Izanagi are the creation gods. Mm-hmm. They're not the highest deity in Japan, the Japanese Shintoism, but they are the gods of creation. Because Izanami died, now she's also the goddess of the underworld at the same time. But they're kind of considered more of a duo kind of thing, as much as I know. So, which takes the role of what, I'm not sure. But maybe in a sense this is similar to the whole, like, you know, the earth being the female, like the feminine kind of like thing, because, you know, well, she is the one that gives birth to the islands, and after that part, there are many sections where things such as mountains are attributed to female deities. So, in that sense, might be similar, but I can't really guarantee too much.
So, question. So, what if there's gods in everything? What exactly constitutes a god? Like, would it just be some otherworldly spirit beyond the material? Like something, there's more power in this than what we can just feel about it.
Well, imagine basically that every single object, life, and concept is a god, in a sense. It's not that, yeah, spirits is one way to say, but it's more about the fact that they exist in that way. In a sense, it's like, you know, kind of like just having that concept in life itself is a god. Like, gods are there to define the world, maybe in words or sounds or anything like that. Whatever you feel is basically something that happened outside of your hand, outside of your power, some great power that's surrounding you in many different shapes. And maybe that's where they got the inspiration of that, but...
Because, well, when I look at Greek and Mesopotamian, well, the cultures we talked about before, usually, like, the gods that you see in those religions, even Norse mythology too, they tend to represent something intrinsic about humanity. For example, Ares, the god of war, also known as Mars in Roman culture.
Yeah.
And this applies to all gods of war. That is tied to rage, that emotion that we all feel within us, and it consumes us at times, and like we at times we are at its whims, and we can't really, like, we're not ourselves. It's something, and it's eternal because it's in everyone. So that concept becomes a god because it has that much power over us. Same thing with lust.
Okay.
And usually the top gods tend to be the embodiments of what ideal the society should be striving for.
Okay, yeah, that's true. That's true for many religions. As much as I know from Shintoism, there is also something like that. There are the deities that represent the most essential part of the universe. The thing is, because people fell so far from it, there are barely any shrines in Japan that actually, like, you know, worship them. But they exist. Now, in terms of for example, the rage or like the lust or something like that, the good and bad aspect thing, as much as I know, they are discerned by a god having two different forms. A single god will either have Nigitama or Nigimitama, which is the more kind and benevolent side of them, and they have the Aratama or Aramitama, which is the destructive kind of side of that. So, one deity could, for example, represent the sun, Amaterasu is the representation of the sun. Could represent, for example, the kind of like, just all the things that sun could offer you in a good way. But at the same time, the power that it has, all like kind of shifts it to make it into like a war god kind of thing. There is a war god separate from it. It's just that Amaterasu also has stories of being kind of a war god in the story. So in that way, like, I think, essentially, like, they do have a representation of what they are, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only characteristic they have. The god of the wind could be a destructive one, or a constructive and like a peaceful one, and depending on what aspect they represent in these two states, they could also represent other aspects that seem related to that. And when Buddhism comes in and ends up like mixing up with Shintoism, that's when something similar to Greek mythology and everything like that happens. Because Buddhism, the deities, I think the word deity also fits them.
Yeah. But
deities in Buddhism are pretty specific in what they represent.
I was actually going to mention one, which is representation of the mother. I saw this edifice of her in stone. I can't remember her name, but she had a row of breasts, like all across. Like there weren't just two; there were like 20 of them.
Is that Buddhism or is that like
Oh, actually no, Hinduism. That's what I'm thinking.
Really? I thought that was Greek.
No,
Artemis.
No, I'm not talking about Artemis.
Okay, because there's another statue of Artemis having a whole bunch of
And that is weird because Artemis is
the goddess of the
hunt,
moon and hunting or something. Yeah.
I thought that would be Hera that would have the mother, the
well,
goddess wife.
I don't know.
But anyway, like it's like that kind of representation because the mother's supposed to nourish and all that.
Oh yeah.
And her expression was serene and peaceful. And there was also a counter to her, which is had 8 armed. It was very destructive. It was birthing something, a man, while also ripping him apart.
Oh wow. And
I guess that was kind of a chaotic. They both the chaotic side, and like the side of order. So that reminds me of that dual representation that you were talking about earlier.
Well, okay, maybe. I hopefully I'm making more of like how to say it, like a not coincidental, like not like I hope that I'm making sense while I'm talking so far.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess if I add one more thing, Shintoism is kind of a forced religion that was created in the Meiji era, which is like only 100 years or something ago. The essence of Shintoism is animism, indigenous animism that was forcefully merged into one religion. That's why. I gotta say, that's more closer to the Shintoism that's not describing Kojiki. It was more like the case that they were indigenous religions of different regions that had different stories and different deities that represent different kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
But the Fujiwara family, who was in power at that time, made Kojiki to basically indicate their power and authority. And some people in Japan, 100 years ago, said, we need to discern Buddhism and Shintoism because that's going to be better. And then forcefully merge that idea of all the indigenous animistic shrines with Kojiki kind of Shintoism. So I will need to say there are a lot of things that don't make sense. I mean, I will be honest. There's a lot of things that don't make sense. There are shrines that worship gods that they don't even know where they are, where they come from.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't even know what it is, but they should worship it because it was worshipped for a long time. But in a sense, maybe that's the chaos part. The part that, it's not ruled. You don't know what's happening. You don't know what god represents what. Some deities could represent a whole bunch of different things at the same time. Or, more specifically, some deities could be considered representing something in a specific region in Japan, but in another region in Japan is considered as a representation of something else. And they also could have the two aspects. And if you combine the idea of yokai and everything, that was basically an in-between of Shintoism and pop culture at the time. It is unruly. There's no pattern in that in a sense.
So, okay, how do these old ideas affect Japanese culture today?
So, old ideas, let's say. So, as I said, it is only about 100 years or a little bit like 200 years ago that people merged the Shintoism of the text and the Shintoism that was there into one thing, and also separated from Buddhism. So before that, Buddhism and Shintoism were kind of the same thing. There were Amaterasu could have had a Buddhism name, and a Buddhist deity could also have a Shinto name. So it was really kind of this arbitrary, worshipping of the concept or some thing that they go basically talk to kind of check themselves. And that's also the reason why deities could be based on real people. There are generals in the past that are considered that become deities. There are, basically you have poets that become deities in the future. You also have a person, an aristocrat, that cursed every single living aristocrat at the time because he was basically betrayed by them. Ended up causing thunders and killing people. Then people freaked out, saying, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. We'll make a shrine. Please calm down. Please." And then later on became the god of knowledge, or something like that. And I guess if we go back to the whole idea of animism, which is just about believing that there's spirits and everything, there's just some supernatural things around you all the time, and your point is to make sure that you acknowledge them and to not feel as if you are the one with superpower, to make sure that you basically live a life where you live together with those things, the things that you can't control and the things that you can control, and everything like that. I guess that just ends up being what's passed on now. You see people go into shrines even these days saying, "I want to get a girlfriend," or "I want to be able to make this I want to be able to succeed in this," or it could also be, "I hope that this place stays safe later on." But there are also people who say, "I will do this. Please, look after me," or "I will come back here after accomplishing this." It could be also these things. So you just acknowledge that existence of something unfamiliar and the unknown and supernatural, so that you can live your natural, familiar, and those kind of life in a good way. So I guess that's the way the old one is still here.
What's interesting about it, it's still kind of like the worship of nature, as you see in most cultures. Honestly, the only things I can think of which aren't worshiping nature are Judeo-Christian religions, and also what evolves from them. So, for example, in the French Revolution, you had the cult of reason, which you should only worship reason. The human thought is the best. There's also deism, which is kind of it's essentially a Judeo-Christian religion, just trying to parse out the superstition. And then also, and another one. So Judaism, humanism. Or that. Okay, I think humanism is the wrong name, but it's there was a one I was reading about. I can't remember the philosopher that coined it, but the idea that basically people are the ideal and should be caring for people themselves. That people inherently have value. And the thing about all these ideas, with the exception of Cult of Reason, that one is a little odd. That was made by Robespierre to essentially Robespierre to essentially worship him during that time. Kind of was talking of himself as a deity at that point. But
just like some Egyptian pharaohs and everything like that.
But the point of that of all those religions is to put humans above nature. That way, that all the nature around us is created in order to benefit us. Not so we can abuse it, but so we need to utilize it. Because if we don't take command over nature, humans die.
Well, I feel simply that's because when the religion was established, nature was their enemy. Because think about it. Their story starts out from being in probably the most harsh kind of conditions in Earth, right?
Well, as evolution goes along, we were before we gained our higher cognitive capacities and our ideas of culture and all that, we were like animals. Like the reason why we get this odd feeling of like this. You know what? When you're disgusted by something, you can't look at it. It makes you like kind of cringe. You walk away. Okay. That is likely like a biological response because things we see associated with that, which we've evolved over time to recognize it. Like those things are riddled with either disease or sickness or death, and therefore they cause that kind of reaction with us. We have that association. Same thing with like how seeing the color blue of the sky calms us down.
Yeah. I guess yeah. Well,
it's a really interesting perspective to view societies and cultures as a constant interaction within our biology, as in these ideas evolve between different groups to kind of develop the best way to survive in this world. And what I need to learn more about more Asian cultures and their backgrounds, and I would actually a lot of different backgrounds, because what I know most about is Judeo-Christian stuff. Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian. I have very little knowledge on the rest of the world. Oh, and Norse too. I do know a good amount of Norse stuff as well. Is that the first things that people see is when you're worshiping nature is because, well, we don't really have control over it. It has control over us the whole damn time. We're doing our best to survive in this world, but there are these forces which we try to appease to help give us the best chance of survival. For again, interesting thing about that is that the Egyptians versus the Mesopotamians, they both were river societies. The Nile River sustained the Egyptians, and the Euphrates and Tigris sustained the Mesopotamians. The thing about the Nile, though, it was very predictable. It rarely flooded, and it didn't really kill a lot of people. Versus Tigris and Euphrates were unpredictable, and they constantly had to rebuild levees because the floods were killing lots of people and overflowing into towns and all that. And that chaos reflected in that the afterlife was not really existent or a good thing for the Mesopotamian people. It was much more disorderly, whereas in Egyptian culture, with that predictableness to it, kind of gave an order to that sense of the time after when you're passing on to the next life. That it was much more peaceful, a better place to be than this world. And an interesting distinction how that kind of changing environment affected that society. And what I find interesting about the jump to the monotheistic religions started by Abrahamic societies, so that would include Islam in that as well.
Yeah,
is that above nature, nature is more than just a chaos. There is an order to it. There is a truth to it, both in how the world works and how we should behave to further ourselves in the world. And as I've been doing my studies of the Judeo-Christian texts, Genesis, the very beginning of Genesis is very interesting in that it applies, it talks about all people, not specifically one group. It doesn't mention the Hebrews until a good way within Genesis.
Oh, okay.
And whenever it's in reference to God, he holds the same moral standards to all people, even people who aren't. Like one specific example is when Abraham is going through his journey, his wife Sarai. So let's go. Abram and Sarai, before they got their new names, once they became Hebrews. She wasn't able to birth him a child, and that happened. And they were old in age, but God promised that he would have a child, and generations and nations would descend from him. So Sarai wanting that to be a reality, she told him to have a child with her consort, an Egyptian maid, and he listened, and he gave birth to a boy named Ishmael. That's what they named him. But afterwards, Sarai became bitter and started mistreating the maid, and she ended up fleeing God takes pity on her and talks with her about it and tells her that her son will also have great people descended from him, that he will live a long life, and blesses her. And that the thing I find really interesting about that is that that same moral code, which he's supposed to embody, that ideal, he's applying it to all people. And no other culture I can think of takes their religious ideas and apply it to everyone. It's not universal. It's specifically to one group, and that tribalism tends to say that one group is better than the others around them.
Yeah, typically, yeah.
So I find that really interesting in the Judeo-Christian text. It's that there is the one God, and he represents objective moral truth, and that is good, and also of order and plan to the world. And if people follow that moral code, it's not guaranteed to live a good life, because you can be a good person and go through hell, but it'll give you the best chance to survive and pass on successfully. And people that forget the moral code tend to fall into chaos and disorder. And you can see, I think the nation of Israel falls 6 separate occasions because the kings start to forget that objective moral order.
Oh wow, that's a lot actually.
And also, most of the Hebrews that are described are very flawed people, versus the non-Hebrews described tend to be much closer to being morally perfect at the time. And it is very interesting that it goes through that.
Honestly, like describing the fall and rise like 6 times, well, like especially when the whole idea is about that they once were with the truth and with the law in a sense, and then but they still could just fall back.
Because I like this idea where it recognizes the nature of humanity as we are not incorruptible. We make so many flaws, and we keep making mistakes all the time, but that's not our potential. All of us, according to the text, being created in the image of God, that we all have this connection to that high moral standard, that we can visualize it within us. We have a choice whether or not we listen to the things that could control all of us, or we listen to truth. And I think that's a very interesting jump to make at a time when every other major culture, worshipped nature essentially, and felt either ruled by nature rather than be able to overcome it. And I find it interesting that people like to dismiss all these old stories as superstition. Because, one, I am not of the assumption, I do not like the premise that humans today are smarter than humans before.
Oh, yeah, that's a big assumption that we have right now.
People like to think that, we're so much better than the past, but the reason why we're doing so well, there's a lot less death and a lot more happiness in our whole planet than ever before, is because we're on the backs of giants that stood before us. Ideals that have been built and fostered over actually tens of thousands of years, however long our species is.
Think about it. It's kind of saying, at some point there were people building a tower, and 100 years later people are still building a tower, and people that are building that tower saying, "Ha, our tower's taller than that." Looking at the past, which is kind of pointless in a sense, because
That actually reminds me of the story of the Tower of Babel. That's one of the Judeo-Christian. It's in the Torah. It's in Genesis, and the idea is before, when the humans spoke all one language, and after God says to go diversify, flee your father's land, go explore the world and populate. And these people were like, no, let's go build a giant tower in a giant city called Babel, and everyone can come together here. And as the tower is being built, and the tower designed to reach up into the heavens. So God decides to come down from the heavens, take a look at this tower, and he, in wanting humans to go and reach that potential, makes it so that different groups can't understand each other. They speak different languages now, so now they can't really build a tower or that city, and they kind of just naturally go split apart and send in different directions rather than stay in one place.
Honestly, it's like, that is one of like the stories, and like, as much as I know, like I only know from like Christianity just because I took a course of like comparative literature, and then ended up like involving Mesopotamian and Christian stuff. But that is honestly a pretty interesting story that I saw like throughout everything, like, cause it
could be an interesting warning against cities. That, like, when you have so many people congregating together, people tend to forget moral codes at least a little bit.
Or maybe it could also be just like a warning to people who kind of go like to like how to say it? A bunch of people that start to go crazy saying, "Oh damn! Oh my god, we're doing this! Oh my god, you're trying to actually walk through a building on a string. Oh my god! Call everyone!" And then everyone starts to say, "Oh my god, we can do this!" And then calm down, man. Calm down. Dude, you guys are too hyped. You guys are way too hyped. Calm down. Jeez, really? Okay, I'm gonna make none of you able to talk with each other, so that you guys will be forced to like calm down. Stop saying that single word. Oh my god, at that and just. My God, you guys are so stupid. Oh, get back at home.
I think that annoys me more for traffic because, actually today when I was driving back from work, it was so slow. We were driving like 20 miles an hour, and I had no idea why. After 5 minutes passed, I passed where the police car was, and he was like stopping someone, and right after, everyone was driving 60. So it was everyone that was slowing down to take a look what's going on, just creating traffic for no reason. Oh, it's always so painful.
I guess that's just the way, like group species are gonna be. If the person around you is doing that thing, might as well follow that without really any particular reason. By the way, how's the time right now?
Yeah, I was to say, we've already hit an hour.
Okay.
So I think that's it for this one.
Yeah, well, congratulations, you wasted another hour.
Well, final thing. So at Teabreak Afternoon on YouTube, I'll link that in the description below. So.
Nice, yep. And just like the way this 1 hour was wasted, my channel is also going to be a place to make you waste your time. So if you're too tired to make like all the efficient and effective use of your time and want some break, then come and waste your time.
Yeah, go listen to Rakugo.
あとね、しばらくはね、ゲームしかやんないからね、落語はそのうちだからね、それはまたもうちょっと待っといて。
Alright, well, so that's it for this one. Have a good night.
Yeah, have a good night.